Welcome back to BensTechLab. Today we're going to be building a completely silent fanless PC build in the MonsterLabo TheFirst PC case. This case is 19 liters in volume, which is relatively compact and is designed around the mini ITX form factor. It's capable of cooling a 100 watt TDP processor plus 120 watt TDP GPU completely fanlessly. But optionally, if you want a little more cooling capacity, you can add a 120 millimeter or 140 millimeter case fan inside to bring up that cooling capacity to 140 watt TDP processor plus 160 watt TDP GPU. Let's take a little closer look at this case. All right, so this is, I've unboxed it out of the box it shipped in because there was a lot of packaging. It was boxed foam and then another box and then a shipping box. So they definitely took care in shipping this case from France, I believe. And I couldn't possibly fit that on my desk and film it and that sort of thing. But I have not opened it up and there is going to be a lot of goodies inside. However, included inside the box, there is a bunch of goodies. Got a few things. I did get a little thermal paste, some Noctua thermal paste with them. There's an extra back panel with some more I/O. And then the only thing that's not included with the case, like from factory, is the different vendor specific brackets. So I've got an AMD AM4 bracket for the processor I've chosen. And then I've also got a AMD Radeon bracket for the GPU that I've got. I've also got some little stick-on heat sinks here that are for the VRM on the GPU. The GPU I've selected actually didn't have VRM cooling to begin with, so these will be totally fine for what I'm doing. And then there's a nice little baggie of extra screws for doing this thing up. So the front of the case here is nice and plain. It's white. I really like the white design. I was going for trying to brighten up my space a little bit here. I did buy a few specific customizations. I think the stock case that you get has the I/O on the top of the case, and I wanted it at the front. So I've got it down here. You can see it along the bottom front of the case. So you've got your power button here, your audio, and your USBs. I think that's more accessible when I plan to have it on top of my computer desk to the left of my computer monitor, where I can easily plug in and unplug USB thumb drives and accessories, that kind of thing. So that's that. The stripe around here is actually a like stainless steel look to it. It's currently got a protective coating on there and I haven't peeled it off yet because I want to save that for after I'm done, just in case you scratch something. But we'll take a quick look around here. So then on the side of the case, also super nice and clean, very minimalistic looking. Rear of the case, this is going to be hidden at the back of your desk. So you can see some of the screws on here for how the case comes apart and in the back panel. This is going to be where your I/O is going to be exposed. And then this is where your power supply is going to be exposed out the rear of the unit. Okay, in terms of the top of the case, you can see here that there's just a black mesh on here. You can see the heatsink through it, and there's a little guard panel on here. This is like magnetic, so you can just pull it off here. If you're really pushing the limits of the cooling of this case, some people pull this off during gaming sessions or that sort of thing to let more airflow out of the top of the heatsink here. There's a little bit of tape on here. I'm gonna peel it off once I open the shell, but you can see the massive cooler assembly in here, which takes up about half of this case in volume, and that's what lets this thing operate in a fanless mode. If you went for top mounted I/O, there would be I/O mounted right here and right here on your case, and you'd have a different cutout than the one that I've chosen, a different faceplate for the top here. All right, now full disclosure, just to be fair to MonsterLabo, I bought a factory second case. So that means this is a B grade unit from the factory, and there may be some minor imperfections on the paint job, particularly on the difficult portions such as the heatsink inside. I don't mind because the heatsink is not going to be shown. I'm not doing any kind of case mods showing it off with a window panel on the side. I like it all enclosed. So I was happy to save the $80 or $100 US for a factory second, which brings up the second important point. This is a pricey case. if you really want totally silent performance, this is definitely the best thing on the market today, short of their next revision, the Beast, which also came from MonsterLabo. But it's a really awesome top of the line case, but it does come with a price that reflects that. The base price for this case is 320 euros. As of the filming of this, that's around 385 US dollars. And that does not include all of your accessories. Once you kit it all out, the full kit price is around 380 euros, which currently comes out to around 457 US dollars. So this is not for the budget builder. This is definitely a niche product for people who want that silent, high performance PC build experience. I love it in terms of the aesthetic, the way it fits on my desk and how it looks. And of course, I'm going for silent. One of the reasons that I want a silent PC is so that I can use it as a streaming machine. So when I'm filming videos, when I'm doing conferences or business presentations, Zoom meetings, I don't want something in the background that's adding noise to the audio in the room. So silent PC is perfect for that. Components today. This is not going to be one of those YouTube videos where it's like I've got all the unobtainium that only the big YouTubers can get today and nobody in their right mind would actually buy at the current market prices. This is going to be a standard PC build that most anybody would actually use in a regular life situation. So for a processor, I've got a Ryzen 3600 XT. I did buy this before Christmas and I'm only just filming this video now at the start of February. That's just how busy life goes. For a graphics card, I've got a Radeon 5500 XT. Again, we're not going to set any records in benchmarking today. This is just meant to satisfy what most users would need. In terms of kitting it out a little bit more, I've gone for some 32 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz RAM LPX, which is low profile, which fits in the small mini ITX form factor cases really nicely. And for storage, I went with a Sabrent Rocket NVMe 4.0 500 gig M.2 drive. For power supply, I got this, this is the NightJar NJ450SXL from SilverStone. This is a completely fanless SFXL power supply, which can fit in this case, which contributes to that zero noise build here. Motherboard, of course, ASRock B550 Phantom Gaming ITX. All right, so let's go and start taking this thing apart. So there's the back panel, which has the space for the power supply and where the I/O connections are going to be exposed. Let's take off this top panel here. All right, and they call these the skins. There are multiple skins available. They make them in black anodized aluminum, black painted aluminum, white painted, red painted, and gray painted, I believe. But check their website if you want to check that out. So that's the top skin. Then comes the stainless steel stripe or brushed aluminum stripe, whichever it is here around the middle. And then let's get the bottom skin off. Take a look at this. So this is the heat pipes assembly. This is going to be the GPU heat pipes. And you can see here what I said about the factory seconds. There's just some minor imperfections here, some spray that's not quite right, and some chips on the heat pipe. Not a big deal to me. I'm happy to save the money. And what do we got here? A little bag of goodies. All right, so in here we've got the all the goodies you could imagine here. So this one is labeled CPU, so I imagine this is the bag of screws for the CPU assembly. This one will be the GPU assembly. We got a bunch of extra miscellaneous screws here. We got a bunch of zip ties, rubber feet, fan mounting grommets, little rubber standoffs, whatever they're called, isolators. Set those aside. All right, so there it is unpacked. You can see the nice big cooler on the front there. Let's take a look here. You can see that like 2/3 the height of the case here, this is all cooler mass, which contributes to that ability to cool so much completely fanlessly. Okay, now for assembly, you can remove this corner of the case here to get easier access to everything. So let's get this opened up a little bit. There's 2 more screws right there. So that corner is removed so we can gain access to where everything mounts in here. All right, so one of the things that I didn't see well documented online, there's lots of little review videos, which I'm sure were sent out for by MonsterLabo, but not many of them show the GPU prep, which is one of the things that I wasn't sure about. So I wanted to show that on video here today. So let's take a look at the GPU first. So this is my Radeon 5500 XT. It looks pretty standard. It is an ITX length card. It is rated for 130 watts TDP, but I did a lot of testing with it and I never got it to draw more than 120 watts from the wall. In order to mount this in the MonsterLabo case, we will need to remove this stock cooler and shroud and everything so that it can mount to the built-in cooler on the MonsterLabo case. Let's go ahead and start taking this card apart so we can get it prepped up to fit on that cooler. So we got to start right from the back here. And we're going to remove the entire cooler assembly off this GPU here. So there's the naked card. There's just a spot of thermal paste on there, not so much. And as I mentioned before, there was no extra cooling on the VRM on this card because it's a lower TDP card. It's really not required. So it'll just be bonus if we add some on there. I'm gonna get rid of that bracket there because we don't need it in this case the way it's designed. It's actually just gonna be floating in the case and there'll be an extension cable to hook your monitor to. Now we've got a totally naked GPU and we're ready to try to fit it in the MonsterLabo case. Before I put any thermal paste in here, I'm just going to try to dry fit it and see exactly how the brackets work. So there's the idea without any brackets or fasteners on there. So the GPU die itself is going to sit right under that cooling block and it's going to float there in the case, and the motherboard is going to go on this back panel right here. And this is the GPU mounting tab. These are vendor specific, so you have to tell MonsterLabo which GPU and CPU you want to use with your case, and they'll send you the correct mounting bracket that should fit the card that you're using. All right, so when this card gets mounted in here, you first mount 4 posts in these holes. They're going to stick up around here, stick through the mounting bracket, and then there will be some nuts with springs that screw on the top. So the first thing to do is to add those posts. These are the components for the posts. There's a thumb screw kind of thing that goes on the bottom of the card and then a post that sticks on top. Now keep in mind these thumb screws are pretty wide in diameter, so they do come with some little insulating grommets to make sure that you don't accidentally short out something on the bottom of the card. So these are just little rubber washers here. So you end up with a little rubber washer sticking around the bottom of that thumb screw. And there's the 4 posts that you're going to need to fasten the GPU onto the cooler. Alright, so these 4 posts are going to go through that mounting bracket there, which is going to slide on here. And that's how we'll attach it. To give myself a little more room to work, I'm just going to remove this cage back here. Okay, we're about ready to start actually installing the GPU permanently. So once the GPU gets on here and the bracket is over the posts, there's going to be a little 3-part assembly here. So there's a nut, then there's a spring, and then there's a washer. This particular card is quite a small GPU die, so just the tiniest, smaller than a pea-sized drop of thermal paste should be good. So you can see here the 4 posts are through the mounting bracket. The mounting bracket is sliding on to the cooler part here, and I've got a little thermal paste under there. Now we're going to start with our washers, spring, and nut. Washer, spring, and nut. Washer, spring, and nut. All right, so there's the basic GPU prep and installation. That's one of the pieces that I didn't see shown very well in any of the review videos that I was watching, and I was quite curious how that would go. I was a bit nervous as somebody who hasn't been modding GPUs before, so I wasn't sure how this would fit and how it would interfere with the other components on the board. There is a few little tricky parts left. One of them is that the memory chips themselves had some very light heat sinking on them before, and it would be good to add something back on there. And so what MonsterLabo has available is this little bag of stick-on copper heat sinks. So let's see what we think we could fit. The VRM on this particular GPU wasn't actually attached to the cooler before, so it's unlikely that it's going to be really necessary, but if you have a bunch of these laying around, then it would be helpful. If you had a little higher powered card, like you were going for that 160 watt TDP card, then it would definitely be required. If you used a longer non-ITX format card, you can get a cooling solution from MonsterLabo that's a long strip aluminum cooler that sandwiches the card. But on the ITX variants of cards, they often put the VRM in such a way that it would overlap with the PCI slot connections, and so you can't use that type of cooling solution. In a longer card, there may be VRM back here, somewhere in this space that's unused by my card here. So that looks like the rough layout for the heat sinks on the VRM here, so I think I'm ready to start actually sticking them down. So I got to stick on the heat sinks for the memory chips now. I didn't stick them on before mounting on the cooler because I wasn't sure how close I could get, and I didn't want to interfere with the mounting of the cooler. So I got some little tweezers here which might help. Definitely the hardest one is right under there. Every GPU is going to be different, and if you had a larger format GPU, the memory chips might not be so close to the GPU die itself, and you might not have to be quite so precise with little tweezers fumbling about in here. Cool, I think it looks kind of pretty with all the copper on here. So we've got these little stick-on copper heat sinks on all the VRM MOSFETs. We've got these stick-on copper heat sinks on the memory chips. And then of course the GPU die itself is cooled by these heat pipes in the MonsterLabo case. So there we go, we've got a fully installed GPU. This is sort of a backwards build to a normal case in that we started with the GPU and we're going to the motherboard last. The reason is the motherboard is going to attach right here and click onto the GPU that's mounted. You wouldn't be able to mount the GPU if you had done it second, because you couldn't stick it into the slot on the motherboard and slide it into the cooler bracket on here. So it's a little bit backwards. Let's set this aside for a minute and get the motherboard ready. So this is the ASRock B550 Phantom Gaming ITX. A nice little motherboard. Came recommended by MonsterLabo as compatible with this case. One of the reasons it's recommended is that you need some clearance on here around the CPU socket to fit the cooler for the processor. Some motherboards have a very large VRM heatsink, often towards the top of the motherboard, and that can interfere with the cooler on the MonsterLabo case. So you got to make sure you check their compatibility list before you go start buying parts for your build if you want to consider this case. I am going to be using M.2 NVMe. So we'll open this guy up here. So this is a Sabrent 500 gig PCIe 4 NVMe SSD. Whew, that's a nice little case it comes in. Look at that. That is a beautiful case for just an NVMe SSD drive. It's like copper. I'm gonna feel bad throwing this case away. There is a peel and stick on the back of the heatsink on this one here, which means you better remove that before you install it, or you're not going to get that heatsink performance. Worse yet, you might even melt the plastic a bit. Wouldn't be so nice. Probably obvious to most people, but if you're a new PC builder, you usually start with your lowest profile component first and work your way up to the tallest component so that you don't get your finger stuck somewhere in there. So NVMe SSD is installed. Next, we are going to go for the processor. That is a Ryzen 5 3600 XT. Isn't that beautiful? I just like how processors look. They just look expensive just with that kind of etching on the heat spreader there. Okay. There we go. And RAM. In my opinion, this Vengeance LPX RAM is actually quite nice looking, and you can get it in a bunch of colors if you care about that. Okay, we've got our basic components all installed on the motherboard here. It's time to figure out the cooler mounting for the MonsterLabo case. Now, similar to the GPU being backwards in how you fit it in the case, the motherboard is similar. So instead of screwing on from the top, it's actually going to put posts through the back of the motherboard and screw on the back. So that'll all make sense when you see it in a minute here. Let's get the case back. And similar to before, there is a sliding mounting bracket on here. Okay, so now we need to add the brackets that are socket dependent. So these are the AMD AM4 brackets, which will relocate the holes on here to fit the AMD AM4 pattern. So let's get these mounted up on here. Okay, with the basic AM4 tabs on there, we need to remove these standard cooler mounting blocks from the motherboard, and these holes are where the pegs are going to go through to mount in the MonsterLabo. You can see that I removed the mounting brackets that come on a typical AM4 socket, and they're just empty holes there. Those are where the pegs are going to stick through when this mounts up on here. So putting the pegs on for the AM4 socket here, there's a little metal bushing on the bottom, and it goes on the inner hole on these tabs. Might take a little trial and error here to make sure you get the fitment right. Okay, so this is definitely a tricky fit to get everything lined up just right. It's okay to bend the heat pipes just a little bit here and there to get it squared up, but it's such a tight fit, I might have to remove the front shroud on this motherboard because it's just touching the side a little bit and getting it off kilter. So I'm going to remove this built-in I/O plate here. It's just a facade anyways, it's not actually connected to the heat sinking on the VRM. So okay, so taking off that I/O shield there. Look at that. All right. So I don't have the GPU in the socket yet. I'm just trying to get the basics working. Like I said, this is one of the trickier cases to get all lined up. Once I am happy with it, I don't have thermal paste in there either yet, but once I am happy with it, you'll get a nylon washer on there, a spring on there, and then a little nut. But I just wanted to get the basic fitment working first. I'm going to want to attach my power supply cables before I get it screwed down in there with thermal paste in there, because it's going to be impossible to reach after the fact. But I think I've got the basic understanding of the cooler okay. So I mentioned earlier, this is a SilverStone NightJar NJ450SXL. This is a totally fanless power supply. I have shown it before because I really like this product. Let's just give it a quick open up here. Beautiful solid assembly. It's fairly heavy. It's all aluminum all the way around with heat sinking on there. Lots of connections on the back. But what we need to, before we can mount our motherboard here, is some power cables. So let's look at these. All right, so I've just got the ATX power and the CPU EPS power here pre-attached, so that once I do the thermal paste and get this motherboard in there, I don't need to take it off again to add anything else. I'm also going to have to figure out exactly where the front panel I/O is. Okay, so we got our front panel USB and our front panel audio. Front panel USB. Wow, the front panel connections are right in there. Super, super tight. All right, we got the power switch attached. So personally, I am going to be putting a 140mm fan inside the case. I figure while I'm building it, I might as well put it in there. I can always put an extremely aggressive fan curve on there so it doesn't even kick in unless you get above like 75 degrees Celsius. All right, so we've got the SilverStone power supply mounted in the back here. Definitely nice and tight to get everything fitted in here, but it is going. So I think we're good to go. Now, just because of the tricky nature of this flipping over the motherboard here, I think I might go, I might apply the thermal paste and spread it around. All right, got a little bit of thermal paste spread around on there, a nice thin layer. It's time to do the operation. All right, so mildly disappointing, but one of the fastening pegs for the AM4 cooler bracket that I got will not thread with one of these, and I've been super careful to try to find the start of the threads and get it started, and it just won't go. So I think I might have to email MonsterLabo and see if they can send out a new one. So that'll be it for now. To be continued. All right, look what just arrived. We got a little care package from MonsterLabo here. I didn't want to finish the video with the mounts not all just right, so I sent them a quick email with a picture of the problem, and they sent me out a replacement CPU fixture kit. So this should hopefully have full replacement for those mounting studs. Here we go. This looks like the same package that was provided in the case to begin with. It is a complete kit here. Well, I'm really happy they sent me out this replacement kit. I don't hold it against them personally because, hey, that's just the way life goes. I've had lots of defective items from other big brands, including Cooler Master and other companies like that. So nothing personal. Glad they sent it out to me really quick. And definitely in the current state of the world with the pandemic and everything, I fully advocate supporting small business. If you want to see small companies like MonsterLabo innovating with the newest fanless case tech, then you should support them and do your best to send some business their way if this is something that interests you. All right. Unfortunately, as with most small form factor cases, taking it apart, you have to almost disassemble it entirely to replace something like a motherboard mounting screw. I had to disassemble this anyways. You might notice that this corner of the motherboard is pushed up just a little bit. Just a small tab of the VRM heatsink. It's not even really part of the VRM heatsink. It was supporting the rear IO plate. It's just touching the Ethernet jack on the back of this case here. Totally common in small form factor that you might have to do a little bit of minor modding to get things to fit. So I'm just going to cut off that little tab here. It's such a small piece, it doesn't even affect the overall cooling of the VRM. Okay, look at that. The processor even got stuck on the block there, got pulled right out. Does not look like any pins are damaged. That does mean that it definitely had very good contact with the cooling block to begin with. Whew. Yep, that was definitely on there. It probably would have ran just fine with only three mounting lugs. And a word of note there, because I had spread the thermal paste out before, there was no thermal paste squishing out the side, so I think it was done quite well. All right, doesn't seem like any pins were damaged, so fingers crossed this is going to work perfectly on boot. Okay, so this was the offending mount right here. This one just wouldn't thread, so we're gonna take that one off of here. Discard that one. Grab one of our new ones here. Looks like MonsterLabo also now includes 5 of these mounting posts in their latest kit. Okay, I mentioned when I was disassembling this, I want to cut off this little tab right here from the heatsink. It's just there to hold the I/O backplate. To make sure that I don't damage the motherboard while using a Dremel around it, I'm going to take the static bag that it came in, and then I'm just going to cut a little hole right here. Put that through there like so. That way when I take a Dremel to this here, I am not spraying any kind of little metal sawdust or sparks or anything on the motherboard itself. To give it a little bit of protection, and I can just quickly zip off that little 1/2 inch of the heatsink material there. So I'm gonna go do that in the garage, and I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, we're back. So having this anti-static bag taped on there, just leaving that little bit out, worked really well in keeping the aluminum sawdust off the motherboard. So that looks nice and cut off, and no aluminum sawdust got on the motherboard, so that's exactly what we wanted. Okay, so let's get our rear I/O hooked up again here. I've definitely been playing a little bit of cable Jenga here, trying to get all of these rear I/O connections brought out to the rear panel. One of the unique aspects of this case in particular is that you can't expose the rear panel of the motherboard directly, and so all the connections are exposed via these extension cables here. I did manage to get 4 USB-A's, Ethernet, a USB-C, and 2 video outputs to the back of this case with this hardware configuration. Of course, with every different motherboard, you may have a different layout of the rear I/O, and so you might not be able to fit everything exactly the same way that I did. So now that we're all wired up, let's get this thing reassembled. All right, the next band here, the accent piece. All right, the top shell here. The main shell on. Now let's get the rear panel. There's the rear panel attached. I think it looks really nice with the white screws that they included with the white case. Then of course we've got our magnetic top frame here, which is a removable dust filter there. Looks good. There we are. It's assembled. Now we just got to make sure it all works. Okay, let's get a mouse and keyboard here. Here it goes, moment of truth. Yes, wow, that took a while. It was just torturing me here. All right, let's go back to the BIOS for a second. Of course, Windows wants to do updates. Why wouldn't now be a good time to do Windows updates? Just in the middle of recording a video, and I've just got 17 minutes left on my SD card. There we go. Perfect. All right, so let's check things over here. Motherboard, B550 Phantom Gaming ITX, good. Ryzen 5 3600 XT, 6-core processor, good. Base clock is 3.8 gigahertz. It's exactly what we're expecting. Total memory, 32 gigs, what we're expecting. So that's all good to see. Let's take a little peek around here. I'm not going to change anything major, but let's take a look at the hardware monitor for a second. So CPU temperature 50 Celsius, motherboard 26. That's all right. So I do have that 140 millimeter case fan in here plugged on as CPU fan 1. Okay, so let's customize this fan curve on this 140 millimeter case fan in there. So what we want to do is have our first temperature threshold be a 0 fan speed. Then we will go to our next temperature threshold and we'll make it quite conservative, like let's go 40%. And then we'll go to 80 degrees Celsius, we could go to 50%, 85 degrees Celsius, could be, even that could be probably 70%, and then critical temperature, let's make that 86. So the fan will be completely off up to 75 degrees Celsius on the CPU temperature. This case is capable of cooling this Ryzen 5 3600 XT completely fanlessly, so this should be a rarity. To get up past 75 degrees Celsius, you have to be doing a long-running heavy workload, such as a synthetic benchmark, or maybe something like a video rendering process where you're rendering an hour-long YouTube video and it's just churning away for a long period of time. So let's see how that works. Let's save this and get to Windows. silence is golden right now. There is absolutely zero noise coming from this case. Fanless power supply. The 140mm fan is off unless we reach over 76 degrees Celsius. I have no coil whine from either this motherboard or this GPU choice. That might just be a bit of luck. Sometimes you'll get some coil whine from a GPU, depending on the manufacturer and the quality and whatnot. It is absolutely dead silent, so that is exactly my objective. Well, that was definitely a bit of a struggle to complete this PC build, but now that it's done, I'm really happy with the result. I like having the internal case fan in there as a backup. Some of the diehard purists are really going to have issue with calling it a fanless case, but also having a position to mount an optional case fan. I like having the insurance. You can always set your fan curve to be really aggressive so it doesn't kick in until the absolute upper limits of the temperature ranges you're comfortable with, and it'll be off all the time unless you're reaching that temperature. If you like this video, please give it a like down below. Feel free to leave a comment to tell me what you like about this video or what you'd like to see more in the future from MonsterLabo. This was a very challenging video to make. You might not know if you just watch YouTube that whatever you try to record for YouTube often takes 2, 3, or even 4 times as long when you're trying to record everything than if you were just doing the build at home for yourself without any cameras. So any support you can show is much appreciated. It really helps me out. That's going to be it for this video. We'll see you in the next one.